Excellent.
All right,
Excellent.
you are set to go.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Christina. We really appreciate that. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning or good evening, depending on where you're joining us today. I am Danielle Pavlith, and I'm the Chief Diversity Officer at SAS, located here in North Carolina in the Raleigh-Cary area. For those that are joining us today, we are so grateful that you are here. If you are here for the parent session, if you can kind of hang tight, we are working through some technical difficulties and should have the link for that here shortly. For those that are joining us to hear from some of our fabulous panelists, we are going to go into our student and professional panel right now. So again, I'm Danielle. I'm going to be moderating this session here today, and I'd love to have each of our panelists do a quick introduction of themselves before we kind of dive into the questions. So I'm going to kind of just go down the list and ask each panelist to just share, your name, where you're currently working, what role you're in, and maybe where you're based. Let's start with that, and then we can kind of dive a little bit deeper. All right, John, you are first on my screen. Why don't you go first?
Good to be here. Thank you very much, Danielle. Hello, everybody. My name is John Woodbridge. I'm a 2020 graduate of North Carolina State University. I studied economics, and I was part of Students Moving Forward, and I know the wonderful Wesley Wade intimately. So currently I'm based out of Durham, North Carolina, and I'm working remotely as a data analyst for the Vanguard Group.
Excellent. Thank you, John. All right, Rebecca.
Hi, my name is Becca. I work for Credit Suisse, and I'm a project management officer, PMO, and I've worked at Credit Suisse since 2019, and I'm based in Raleigh.
Wonderful, thanks. And all right, Pavni.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, I'm Pavni, and I'm actually a student, so I'm graduating next year in May. And so I'm a year-round intern at SAS, based on Ontario, and I go to school in Indiana, middle of nowhere, literally. Like, there's a huge cornfield, 5 minutes away from me. So, in fact, my school owns a lot of cornfields. Like, I'm surrounded by cornfields, and I'm a testing automation intern at SAS, so I'm doing that year-round, and I was there last summer, and now in school I'm studying software engineering. So yeah, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do, which is work full time. It's like finding a job. So that's kind of where I am in.
Very exciting. And Pavni, remind everyone what university you go to in Indiana.
I go to Rose-Hulman, so it's really tiny. It's a specialized, think of it as RIT, or Rochester Institute of Technology, but really, really hard and a lot less students.
Yep, wonderful. Well, good. Thank you all so much for the wonderful introductions. Since we are here today with, emerging professionals or soon to be entering the workforce, we thought we would talk a bit about, job hunting and the job searching process and the interviewing process. So the first question I wanted to ask each of our panelists is to share a little bit about what your job hunting experience was like. How did you search for opportunities? And, can you talk to us a little bit about how you applied for jobs before ultimately landing the role you are in now? And John, why don't we go in the same order and have you go first?
Oh man, that's a topic I can speak to a lot about. So I graduated at the worst possible time in May 2020, in the middle of a pandemic. And I was unemployed for a whole 6 months before I found my first job in January. And, to be blunt with you, I mean, for us neurotypical folks, and also, neurodivergent folks, but also for neurotypical folks, the job market is just brutal. I mean, it's an incredibly arduous process, and you just have to apply. I think I applied to over hundreds of applications. And so what I did was I used a variety of sites such as, LinkedIn, Indeed, but also what is really helpful is sort of unlocking the hidden job network, like finding, references and contacts from your friends and whatnot. So some advice I can give to the job market is really, it's just, you get better with practice. It's really just learning how to like hack and unlock the method. Like, for example, there's a technique called the STARS technique that I use, which stands for situation, task, action, result. And it's pretty much, when you're interviewing in the job process, you're sort of like essentially framing your experiences like what you accomplished. And that there's sort of that, like, what I found really helpful is, I just had my whole resume and biography just like memorized. And like whenever I had a bunch of sort of questions pre-planned that I knew how to ask, like, like what happened to the person who was previously in this role? What's sort of like the ebb and flow of your work culture at your company? And various questions like that to sort of show interest and whatnot. And yeah, it's a pretty arduous, it's a rather arduous process. And I think really what I would do is I found that interviewing over Zoom, it's a lot easier because I could take a notepad and sort of write down answers to the questions, as well as sort of write down information about the organization so that I could ask like follow-up questions and I could be sort of prepared in the interview process. It is pretty challenging. That's that's really all I can say.
Yeah, that's great, John. Thank you. Interviewing is interviewing and applying for jobs. You're right. Definitely can be an arduous process, and looks like it worked out very well for you. So we'll hear a little bit more about what that process was like for you. Rebecca, would you like to share a little bit about your job hunt experience?
Yeah, so I looked very much on and off for about 2 years. I was coming out of fast food, so I was an assistant manager at a fast food restaurant. And I applied to a lot of job openings, and I did honestly get more interviews than is typically standard because I am a strong writer. My cover letters were very strong. I have a lot of classical training in writing, and that is an extremely helpful skill to have. Is just and it is an extremely underrated skill to have. Is writing. And then I got the interviews, but then I failed the interviews pretty dismally because I have trouble with eye contact. I have trouble sitting still. And I have trouble, at that point, I had very severe trouble with confidence. And that came across very, very clearly. So I actually applied to SAS and I got an interview. There was the video interview, and then I had an interview with Danielle, and I had absolutely no skills they needed. I was a first semester computer science major who could at the time pretty much just make a pop-up come on the screen that says hello. So they forwarded my application to teach, and then they had me interview at Credit Suisse where they had a good fit for me. But I would also say, like John said, that LinkedIn is a very, very strong tool. I did a lot of interviews and a lot of connections that I had with recruiters. I actually just messaged Danielle out of the blue and was like, "Hi, can I talk to you?" And she did. So, and I did that with multiple people. I've gotten a lot of good mentors that way. And I've also built myself a reputation on LinkedIn through my posting. Because I try to post at least once a week, and a lot of opportunities have come out of that. So those would be the big points that I really stress. Is writing is important and it will set you apart. And then networking. And for me, I started being more successful with interviews when I started disclosing I was autistic and applying to autism programs, because suddenly people were trained to look past some of the struggles that I had in interviews. And the interviews became more skill-based. And that is very important to me. So.
Wonderful. Thank you, Becca. That was great. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in just a moment about disclosure. So it's a great kind of segue into that. But before we do, Pavni, we'd love to hear from you about, your job hunting experience, I guess, before your summer joining us at SAS and even after.
Oh my God, oh my God, it's just been crazy experience. I mean, I don't know. Let's start with the most outrageous one, which is, so I always have my heart in working internationally. I know it sounds crazy, but I did a whole set of interviews for a company in Sweden. And then they were like, they couldn't hire me because of the visa process. But even though I was really mad about it, because it was like, you guys had one job to do, which was to do the research on that visa process. And it was ultimately like, they were like, I think this happened actually a couple of days ago, because then it was like my pipe dream to work in Sweden. And I was like, literally like there. But on the other kind of thing was, I've learned that one thing is, at least internationally, like, I don't know if this is like for foreign companies, like at least this is pertains to like Stockholm, is like, one thing is I did start disclosing, but because I am very well aware, like, unfortunately, I don't fit the mold of being autistic, where I'm not, I'm of color, I'm a female, and I'm Asian, particularly of Indian origin. And I'm not saying those are like bad things. There's a lot of things, appreciative of what my culture is, but it doesn't, like, there's a lot of stereotypes that are always on my community. And the biggest thing is that it really makes it hard for me, because I'm put in with these expectations that, there's a lot of people from India who are in IT, and that is a good thing. Like, I don't know, that's your opinion. So it's been really hard to like find a delicate balance of like trying to defy the stereotypes, because everyone knows a lot of Indians in IT. So that's kind of the biggest thing. And the other thing is that I've learned is like disclosing, I'm very vague on purpose, because I never say I'm autistic, because I realized that it could have an implicit bias. But the other thing is that surprisingly in foreign markets, like at least in my experience, because I have actually had zero luck interviewing the US. So I've tried all kinds of routes of like referrals. Those exactly have not worked out. I don't know. It's hard because it's so early in the hiring season. So that's the hard part. The other thing I've tried is a lot of online applications. And again, the ATS system, everyone knows it's a beast. And I keep on getting rejected. So I don't know. I'm also trying.
Except for SAS.
Yeah, except for SAS. But it's like, even then, it's like, there's the ATS system, which I've tried applying online, which I'm realizing referrals are your way to go. I've tried that. I've had this thing, and I'm actually very lucky where I have a good network of people in top tech companies. Everyone's in FANG, but I don't want to work there. So that kind of puts a huge damper of like, I'm realizing my aim is to work in a like smaller company, like even though SAS is like a Easter egg, I would say SAS is an Easter egg in the sense of like where you get the good benefits and there's a decent work-life balance, like, which is way different from compared to people who I personally know who work at IBM or something, where like they work 14, 15-hour days. Like at MasterCard, I learned that being a software engineer, you don't get paid you get paid hourly, and you might not even get benefits. So there's a lot of red flags. So it's been a dumpster fire. And I'm just applying internally at SAS. So I'm hoping something will work out that way. Because honestly, I just need one job. So that's kind of like what I am like doing. I'm also looking into the federal level. We'll see. I'm trying everything.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's definitely challenging, especially right now too. once again going into job searching and, interviewing during the pandemic, right? We were hoping we'd be past this point, but we're still here, and it's definitely challenging. So we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. But we mentioned disclosure. I know Pavani, you mentioned it, and Becca mentioned it. I didn't know if anyone had anything else they wanted to add. John, I don't know if you have anything you want to add, but since we kind of went down that path, I think there was some maybe chat, some questions in the chat that have come in. Just not sure if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, sure. I would say that I always go the route of full disclosure. I always say something along the lines of, hey, in the purpose of, disclosure about myself, I'm neurodivergent or on the autism spectrum. Do you think that would be an issue with your company? And most of nearly all of the time I've disclosed that, the hiring managers and workers who were interviewing me were very supportive. So I always think honesty is just really the best policy, I feel like, when it comes to those type of things. It really helps, set and manage expectations, and, really in case something comes up, or some issue down the line, or something like that.
Yeah, that's great. I don't know if Becca or Pavani have anything else you want to add related to disclosure.
So I found that I do have to disclose because I'm not going to be successful without accommodation. So if somebody is not going to hire me because I'm autistic, then I was not a good fit. So I ended up not, until I started joining autism hiring programs. I actually was fired twice, and I am very blunt about that. I tell people that because I think it's very important to people to understand that even if you fail, you can become successful. I've been at Credit Suisse very successfully for 2 years. But I need a certain amount of understanding, patience, and flexibility in order to be successful. So I feel like disclosure is important, and there are programs out there that are growing in size and in notoriety for autistic people to apply through.
That's great. Thank you, Rebecca. And I know you've been a huge voice in the community around this particular topic, around trying to, educate. I think that's a really important point. And, from an HR perspective, I think, John and Rebecca, you both touched on this around, wanting to be successful, right? And the purpose behind disclosure. And I would just, if it's okay with you all, add this in here, that I think it is important to, if you choose to disclose, that's a personal decision. But I've shared this with some of our panelists before, that we meaning from HR professionals want to be coming from a place of, hey, here's why I'm sharing this, and here's why this is important, right? I want to be successful, and I have a lot to contribute. And I think, there are stereotypes and stigmas that, neurotypical individuals should be educated on, and should do the work and be educated on. But I think oftentimes, and we'll talk about this a little bit more at the end of the panel, where we start to talk about confidence, because you mentioned that, Becca, and something I wanted you all to talk a little bit about before we close out today, around how oftentimes with disclosure, there's a perception of negativity instead of positivity, and all of the wonderful skills that autism brings to the table. So I just want to put that out there to kind of tease the fact that we are going to talk about that later on in the panel. Pavani, did you have anything that you wanted to add regarding?
Yeah, I think about the disclosure. So I think again, maybe, I don't know. So here's the thing, I unfortunately work in again, I think my angle is very different because it's like, I unfortunately did not grow up around people who were very accepting of autism, unfortunately. I think it just took like, it's something like, I also didn't know I was autistic until like almost 4 years ago, but that's a different story as to why. The main thing is I figured that if I won't disclose I'm autistic until I meet someone in person or like on a video interview, because I figured out that, I don't know, honestly, for me, I've realized like, I don't know, maybe this is also from a lot of hearsay, is like, when I asked a lot of people from external companies, like, would you hire someone who's autistic? A lot of times, and I'm talking like senior developers, like senior or like tech leads, like especially in software engineering, at least, a lot of the times the answer was no. And that kind of put a very nasty kind of feeling in my mouth of like, where is the line of like, and I kind of was honestly flabbergasted as the answer was like so bluntly no. And they were saying like, you know, like how disabilities, like I think even this kind of deals with from like a higher up perspective. I'm not saying everyone is bad, again, at least this is from my personal experience. And I think it is true to a certain extent of like, if you would ask like, maybe not people at SAS, but again, maybe someone at Amazon or like, again, where the work culture is a very like grind and grind and grind, where they're like, having someone with disability is a liability. And it's like, it's always like a liability and it's always like really annoying. It's like, and then the other thing is like the accommodations, I feel like it's always being viewed as a burden, where it's like, I'm asking, like, I think at least I know a lot of autistic people, like at least some people stim a lot. I don't know. I mean, I don't do it personally, but I do know that some people, some of my friends like will get these toys and like pop them. I mean, everyone's different. And it's like a lot of times they would be told in work to stop doing that, or they'd be told to stop pacing around. I was told to stop pacing around or like stop like bouncing my knee. And it's like to an extent it comes to like, where am I? Like, am I here to please everyone? Where like simple behaviors, or should I say like, maybe it's a problem with you where you need to understand that, you know, me bouncing my knee, if it's frustrating for you, that's really like, but you can listen to like heavy metal music, like, you know, like most people find that distracting. So you see there's a correlation. So I think that's, for me, is this in person, I feel like that's the biggest red like thing of like the red flags come up when the facial reactions, because for me that's like a dead giveaway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. You know, you talked about the stimming, and I just want to kind of bold and underline the importance of education, right? And understanding. I think that's where a lot of stigmas and stereotypes come into play, is the lack of education. Around, here's why I might be pacing, like you said. Here's why, right? This is how I absorb information, right? And then once people know why, it usually is like, oh, okay, and so I think there's additional education that needs to be done, for sure.
Yeah, might I interject? I think here's the main thing. I personally think from even people from like all kinds of teams, I think the main thing is that society will benefit a lot when people think that disability is not a liability, because honestly, a lot of people who are disabled, if they're in a wheelchair, hard of hearing, honestly, a lot of them just want to work and be productive members of society, and it's beneficial for everyone.
Absolutely.
And we're the largest minority.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's what, 1 billion, over 1 billion people. That's such a great point. Well, I know we had a little bit of commentary in the chat about the pandemic. So let's kind of shift gears to talk a little bit about that. How has the pandemic impacted your professional or your work life specifically? And do you find that you enjoy remote work? Is it preferred way of work, or do you miss seeing people? How has that transition been for you? John, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. So I would say working in the pandemic, I mean, it's really quite, I would say, honestly, there's some pluses and minuses. On the plus side, I really like working at home and not having a commute And, the fact that it feels like just all the prep, like getting ready for work, like that's just gone. And that's really nice. And it feels like I sort of have more autonomy. On the other hand, it's really hard to separate work and life. And it leads to a lot of burnout, and it feels like my work life is really like bleeding into like my personal life. And also like it can lead to like, oh, you're trapped in your room all day, because like, that's where you both like work, and also like, you like recreate and like do recreational activities.
Yeah, definitely pros and cons for sure. Yeah, thank you. Becca, do you want to weigh in on that?
So before I start on that, I want to answer a Q&A question that was directed at me. Technically, I was undiagnosed with autism during before my current position. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 25. But and for all intents and purposes, it was the side effects of my disability that caused me to lose those jobs. However, they were international jobs in Costa Rica, which does not have worker protections that I knew of at the time. So it's not the United States. It was not against the law there. But so once I was diagnosed at 25 and I started going into positions with sort of a new understanding of me and what I can contribute and what I need to contribute. I mean, that just changed everything. I 2 interviews after my diagnosis, I suddenly had a job that I've been very, very, very successful at. And then when it comes to working in the pandemic, I have been working remotely, and to John's point, it is very important to separate, especially where you sleep and where you work. I actually moved as a result of this because this is a kind of a funny story, but my cat started eating my office chair. And I mean, like literally taking chunks out with his teeth, and I broke. I was just, I couldn't deal with it anymore. So now I moved to a 2-bedroom apartment so that I can have an office to both have the separation between sleep and work, and to protect my work wires, because I also went through many. This is very important, this little protection wiry thing here, because the cats will chew through the wires and break my headsets. But I think that hybrid is best for they're locked out right now, Pavani. Although one is asleep over on the couch. I do too. And then I think hybrid is the best, because for me, I get very overwhelmed when it comes to a certain amount of socialization. And in order for me to be my best self, I need to be separate. So, but I want to be able to see people at times. So.
Yeah, that's such a great point, and funny about your cats. I know there's a lot of chatter in the chat about cats. They are funny.
Yeah, they're my favorite thing.
Pavani, do you have anything you want to weigh in on regarding, pandemic life, work life?
Yeah, I think it's actually interesting from a student perspective, in the sense of like, for me, my past internships as SAS have been virtual. So that's been kind of, I'll say this. I think hybrid work, I think everyone should just have the option to be virtual, because quite frankly, like, I save a lot of money, and also, like, at least for me, I'm miserable in the office. Like, I literally like, I literally am like someone who just, I do school, I do well, but I really don't enjoy school, like in the sense of like, it's not something that brings me as much fulfillment as I know working would. But for me, working in a cubicle or like an office just seems like a path of misery because one, it's like I just really enjoyed being at home and I'm a homebody. And the most important thing I find that actually for me, it's been great with the work-life balance. Like I think it's like really just easy as like simply like instead of like slamming a door on someone, you're like click and you click off. So for me, that's been really good. And I think if everyone has the option to be remote, it just like I love to travel. So for me, like my dream is to travel after I graduate like full time. And for me, remote work is like the key to that. And I honestly would rather have like, like, I mean, I asked my parents honestly, because my goal is actually to get a remote job and it's like just travel full time. And I asked my parents, like, is it okay for me, like, to not rent an apartment or anything, but just simply, like use home as a base or something. And they were like, okay, so I really need to get the job, which is remote. I have the roof over my head, so that's good. But for me, virtual work has actually just been wonderful, like in terms of like being able to pursue more hobbies. And because I'm not physically driven by like getting up and getting ready, like I don't know, I find that like at least as a woman, there's a lot of standards you have to put in, like you have to put makeup and like I don't do all that stuff, but it's like I just find that I'm not judged by my appearance, and that's something that's really nice. And my work can speak for itself. And honestly, it's like if I'm really lonely, I can go meet the person next door. I'm probably big on like having big, I'm someone who probably has more plans on what I want to do and have a lot of hobbies outside of school. So for me, work is just, I do my work and then I'll be done.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's definitely a time saver for sure. And that's such a good segue, talking about school. You mentioned Pavani, balancing school and how that was different than work. So I wanted us to talk a little bit about that because school does provide a lot of structure, right? You have your dedicated class time, you have your tests on a certain day or a certain time, and there's very clear expectations. How have you all navigated the ambiguity sometimes of the workplace where things might not always be, very clear or very set in stone? Can you share a little bit about that? I don't know, Pavani, if you want to go first, since you.
Okay, yeah, since I'm not, yeah, we can go there. Yeah, at least for me, like, I think like since I actually live by myself, which is kind of funny in college, but that's because of COVID and stuff like that, and rent is dirt cheap here, so I'm able to afford to. But like, I find that unfortunately with school, I actually found that I'm happier with my internships, and like summertime has been the best time because I mean, yes, like the pressure of being an intern is way less than being, a full-timer. Like I have to acknowledge that. But the biggest thing is that like that taste of like there's a definitive end. Like I think the main thing with school I don't really enjoy is that at least with the amount of schoolwork I have is like I'm like from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed, it's all about homework and trying to figure out when to do that. And it's like there's never been like a day where it's like I can completely switch it off. And it's like I have my school email on my phone and I'm like, I literally don't know how to do that for work. And for me, that's a big thing of like where I think for me at least, I'm a very structured person. I like structure, so that's for me never been a problem. It's more so just having this available time where I don't have to put myself to the complete maximum capacity.
Wonderful. Thanks, Pavani. John, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I've never really been good at structure. Like I'm a pretty horrible procrastinator. And like, just like my bedtimes and waking up times are pretty variable. So, I mean, that's something you got to work on. And, that's something I've been kind of working on all my life. But usually what I found adjusting to the less structure environment in the workplace is, I mean, usually one benefit is what you have to be doing. Like there's usually, if I'm not engaged in some sort of training, there's some sort of project that I'm working on for the client. And and what I do like is, we sort of keep track of what we're doing at in the workspace with the agile method. Like we'll put on like we'll basically like we'll like pin what we're doing on like a little storyboard. And so usually I find a combination of that usually keeps me on task, as well as I mean, for me, my planner and my diary booklet is super important for like outlining everything that I need to do on the day. And so to me, that's really how I sort of manage. And it's a struggle. Like but like I found like Google Calendar to be pretty helpful. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. You mentioned the technology that you're using. I saw Bill commented on Agile and how, there's really great tools that do help, keep you on task and help keep you accountable. And that's a really, really great point is that you bring up is, finding those tools, whether they exist, in your company or, on the team that you're using, or it's a way to explore some free, tools and apps and stuff that, you can download on your, phone or whatever to help, help you accomplish tasks. It's a great point. Becca, what about you? Do you want to weigh in a little bit on structure or lack thereof sometimes?
So in fast food, wow. In fast food, there's actually quite a bit of structure. You have to arrive at a certain time, or that's you're non-compliant. You're going to most likely be fired after a certain number of times of being late. Your shift ends in some places at a certain time, although in other places it does not end at a certain time. And there is a uniform that you have to wear, literally down to the styling of your hair in some places. So, and the number of earrings, like where I was working, was down to the number of earrings and the color of the earrings you were wearing had to stay within, there was a poster with all the rules. It was great. But when I transitioned to corporation, I am very lucky in that my supervisor has a personal connection to autism. So I have a lot of rules that apply to me because that is what I need. I mean, without set rules of like both a schedule and sort of what just rules in general, I get very anxious, and it will get to the point where I will worry about even walking away for lunch because there's, how long do you take? How long until people get annoyed with you? What if somebody needs me? What if the world is going to explode? Like, I don't know. So it is, I got very lucky with that, where he is very understanding and provides rules where I need them. But with the flexibility to, those rules are not real. And I know those rules are not real. So if I do need to break a rule, it is not breaking a rule. They don't really exist, but they're there because they make me feel better.
Hey, but it works. It's what works for you.
It does.
It what works for you. And of course, having supported management also makes that, I'm sure, much easier.
Yes. And he has been a good portion of why I have achieved the things that I've achieved lately. So. Wow,
that's amazing. All right. Well, I know we have some questions in the chat here, so I'm going to ask there's really two questions, but I'll save the very last one for the very end of the session today. But the last question I have before we go into attendee questions, Becca mentioned earlier on around, having confidence, right? First starting your job search a couple of years ago, and how, getting a lot of rejections, it can be very debilitating. It can be very discouraging. And so I want to hear from all of the panelists about how you've built confidence, over the last several years. What has contributed to you developing that confidence? It could be through leadership support. It could be mentorship. It could be, practice. We all suffer oftentimes with with confidence and, imposter syndrome. It's very real. So I'd love to hear a little bit. And Becca, I'm going to call on you first, if that's okay, since I know this is a topic that you talk a lot about. So I'd love for you to kick us off.
So I want to start with what broke down my confidence, because this was actually a parent submitted question before the panel
Mhm.
is I did not have to try in high school, middle school, elementary school. I just sort of breezed by. In college, I had a harder time, but it was still fine. And then the biggest issue that I always had was friends, but like from an academic standpoint, there were very few challenges for me. But then when I failed those two positions, that hurt, but there's a huge stigma against college graduates working in fast food. I mean, I was working in fast food and I was living in my parents' basement. I mean, it's an ongoing joke. It's even in South Park as a joke. So that is like I cannot I am almost ashamed at how much that affected my self-esteem, and how much I defined myself and just looked down on a fast food job, which I now recognize is a very difficult, very highly skilled job. And I am now a big advocate for hiring fast food workers because there's skills that you just do not get in corporations that corporations really need. And so even though I was then successful in Domino's, I was very much like, I didn't see it as success. But as I was promoted within the company, I started gaining back some of my self-confidence. But what really did it is I went back to school, and for a computer science degree, I did not do well in class. And I was telling people, I have a disability. I'm not going to be able to do this. Sorry. But it has turned out that what works for me is having a practical problem to solve. Like, you give me an assignment in school that has no effect on anybody, and I just don't learn. I'm just going to struggle with that. But I can program now. Like, I can actively automate things, and I've contributed huge time saves off because of that, across multiple companies. Because I volunteer at other companies because I know now that I need the right motivation to grow my skill set. I'm not going to keep growing my skill set if I just watch videos online. I need to practice and have a problem to work through. So it was a little bit of coming to know that I am disabled, but there are ways I had to learn how to motivate myself, and I need to learn how I learned. I also needed a diagnosis because a huge issue I had was meltdowns that I didn't understand why I kept having. And they were very much dismissed, and I was told by people that I was just spoiled and I shouldn't be throwing tantrums at 25 years old, which is fair, but not. Once I had a diagnosis, my friends, I can just text them. I literally had this conversation last night. I can just text them and say, hey guys, I'm too overwhelmed to go out today. And they'll just be like, okay, we'll see you next time. And when I go out, I wear headphones everywhere I go to protect against sensory overload, which is greatly raised my stress threshold because I always was up here, like way over my head because of sounds. I'm incredibly sensitive to sound. It's incredibly painful. And now that I wear headphones to help mitigate that, I found that my just general, I can take a lot more and I stay calmer, and I haven't had a full meltdown since 2019. Since I started really adopting like these headphones are coming with me, can't take them away from me. So coping, and I also spent a lot of time in therapy, and I really strongly recommend therapy. I have had wonderful therapists who have helped me recover from my failed positions and helped me recover some of my self-esteem. And my therapist in 2017 had, or 2017 recognized autism, where 12 years of teachers and then college had missed it. And actually, what led to my diagnosis was one of my termination letters was just, it was just a laundry list of symptoms. And we were looking at it and it was like light bulb. And we were like, oh, so that kind of explains things. So a combination of diagnosis, therapy, and just learning more about myself helped me overcome that, and also very supportive bosses who worked very, very hard to build up confidence. And I still get a lot of that, where a lot of people very much care in my professional career and out externally to my professional career, very much care that and recognize that I still have confidence issues. And so they are very insistent on telling me when I've achieved something and made an impact so that I can see that. So yeah, that's sort of the path to both losing my confidence and starting to gain some of it.
Thank you for sharing so much, Becca. That's lots of great advice there. I'm like jotting notes down even as you're talking. John, do you want to go next and talk a little bit about how you've developed confidence and your experiences through the whole job search process?
I would, actually. And, that's a very powerful story, Rebecca. But, I also have kind of a similar story. My confidence was shattered. I actually had to take an extra year of college because, so at NC State, I was pushing myself hard. I was doing 2 degrees. I was doing the economics honors program, doing data analytics program. And all of a sudden, like senior year, I just had a breakdown and just total burnout. And I failed a bunch of classes, and it destroyed my college GPA, and it was like shattered. I felt like, my life was over. Like I was wondering, how the heck am I going to get into grad school? How the heck am I going to get a decent job? Like, how do I tell employers this? I'm just going to be some loser, and I'm going to be stuck living at my parents' house. And after that, when I graduated, it was in the middle of the pandemic, and I was unemployed. I was living in my parents' house, and the world was collapsing around me, and it was really, really hard. What I found, though, that helped build my confidence is, I guess, honestly, just really kind of like, I'd say achievement, like both, being able to get a job. And then finally, at the job, I suffered horribly and still kind of do from imposter syndrome, but being able to complete projects for the job and like realizing, oh, I am intelligent and, I am capable. So, but also another thing besides, as Rebecca mentioned, therapy is a very good thing that's very helpful. I mean, I also personally vouch for that. But I would also add, from my experiences of failure and almost like failing out of college, although it doesn't look like it, like when you're in the bottom and like when you're in the depth and like when you're in the worst part, I mean, things do get better, and that happens. And also, it's important to take time to realize that, no, your life isn't over. Like sometimes some doors close and, other doors open. Like, for example, I'll tell you, the first job I actually got like the first job offer I got before I started my job in January, I got in August. It was like as some sort of like financial analyst for foreign like investment company, and I rejected it because because it required it was incredibly demanding, and I also had a pretty bad gut feeling about the second line manager, and all my friends and my parents said, "What are you doing? You're crazy." But it turned out to work for the best. So really, I'd say, as cliche as it sounds, like you sort of have to trust in yourself, and also like honestly, like only if you've ever been, there's a quote that I love. It's only if you've ever been in the deepest valley can you ever know how glorious it is to be on the highest mountaintop. And that really kind of sums up my experience. I've like I'm successful. Well, I guess I wouldn't say I'm successful, but like I mean I've been in the depths, and it can be very challenging at times.
Yeah, thank you. That's such a great quote or sentiment. One I'm gonna log up in here because you bring up a great point about that. So, Pavani, what about you? Do you want to talk a little bit about developing confidence?
Yeah, sure. Oh my God, that's so much to say about that. I mean, like for me, confidence, like I've had like crap low self-esteem. I mean, so much so that it led to eating disorders. Like that's a whole different story, but it was just, absolute like garbage. And I think one of the main things for me was like school certainly did not help with it. Like at least I was bullied as a kid. I mean, kids. Like, I mean, I wish kids were nicer, but that's a whole different, debate for another day. Basically, like I feel like a lot of it stemmed from like teachers not understanding, and I always felt like I was so different. And for me, actually, the biggest thing that helped me, I feel like, get more confident was mainly my mom. I mean, my mom was the biggest thing because she was like, I always love you, whoever you are. And I think for me, that was like, they literally say, like love, I don't know, can save lives. Like literally it was that way, like in deeper of like how my mom, like she took me to therapy. Like even I didn't know. And I think, even she didn't know. And I think the main thing was actually getting diagnosed with an eating disorder was one of the best things ever, because it really just was like, the thing was with my diagnosis was like I had anorexia. Like I'm all clean now. It's been a long time. The main thing is that my diagnosis was so atypical. Like it was like a sudden spiral. And I'm not saying everyone's story is different. And like not trying to delve too much into that, it was basically like my mom was like, this was it. And then one doctor in the hospital was like, you have to go get her tested for autism, or like, and that's how it kind of dealt with these whole labels. And I have to say though, like the labels have given me a lot of confidence. I know it sounds weird, like in the sense of like, I understand why I do things the way they are. And I think the main thing is also like just getting out, like my mom was very like encouraging me and told me to get out of the house and go to college out of state and live alone. Like, I mean, that's pretty, I never thought at 20 I would be able to live alone and, thrive. And I think that trust of like trusting yourself really came in like in freshman year. I did well, like, so I'm not saying college has been easy. It's definitely been like a hell road. Like it's like the dumpster fire again. College has been up and down, but I'll say that at least like moving out of my parents' house and like being independent, like, and even though like, yes, I'm financially dependent on them, but like, working an internship, like just trying to do the best I can and realizing my own dreams, like I think was the biggest part in getting the confidence. And I think the biggest thing I've learned is like, at least my parents, like again, my mom in big part was, I also won't lie that therapy did help, but I unfortunately, I'll say this, like therapy is great, but I think for me, because of like a lot of financial things, like where, like we're spending so much money on getting me therapy for all these other places, right? Like speech therapy, like unfortunately, therapy is very expensive. Like if you have a child who's stuttering and can't communicate, but then you had to make the hard choice between their mental health and then versus like their I don't know, stuttering and figure out their speech, because it's like there's no right way to choose it. So it was literally kind of unfortunately like that where it kind of came down to be. And a lot of the self-confidence also came from books, which is really funny. And I think for me, I'm always a big reader. And for me, reading a lot of books about characters who actually like were neurodivergent, and it's like, and believe it or not, in the romance genre, I know romance gets a stigma of like being like this, I don't know, like graphic, you know what I mean? Like all that stuff. It gets a really bad stigma. But I have to say though, like I do read a lot of wide variety, but I also do read romance. Like I'm gonna fully own up to it, I'm a geek. And I have to say though, like there was one book I think called Win Some Lose Some that really was just like, it's a romance book, whatever, get over, like people, I'm like, just get over it. They're smooching, whatever, but the main thing is that hero was like autistic, and it was just like, I just saw myself in him, and I just was like, I think for me, meeting characters who just had something similar to me was like, I just melted, and I was like, this character is me. And that literally made me seeing other people in books, honestly, even if it was like a person riding a dragon.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, so
Cool.
that's
I'm gonna write a
how,
dragon.
in a nutshell. And even now I read a lot, and that's been really the biggest way of helping myself feel normal.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Pavani. That's a really interesting perspective. And yeah, if you have good book recommendations for some of our attendees here today, put them in the chat so other folks could maybe get inspired.
Sure. It's just, I don't know. It's like if people are comfortable with, I'll say the books I read, they do carry a lot of stigma, like young adult. They're not the classics like Huckleberry Finn or like, like Shakespeare. So.
Well, that's okay. Well, yeah, thank you all so much for sharing. I know it can be difficult to, share trials and tribulations, but I think you all are amazing and are doing wonderful, incredible things. And, the trials and tribulations are a part of your journey. And I'm sure what has contributed to the success that you're experiencing now and you will in the future. So thank you all so much for sharing. We do have some questions in the chat, so I'd love for us to answer some of those. I know we've had a few that have been answered. There's a couple in here about disclosure. So let's revisit that. One of the comments in the chat, I'm going to read it in the Q&A, is, hi, I'm a senior. I currently have a part-time job working at a recreational center. I'm wondering how I go about socializing and interacting with coworkers who think that I am mean because I shut down and do not speak very much. Do you all disclose to coworkers? Would anyone like to comment on that question?
I can answer that one. I've always disclosed just because I have the same issue, and but it's a very personal decision. It does help with misunderstandings in particular, because people then know why you are the way you are. And I also, when it comes to socializing, one thing that is very helpful is doing research into topics. I definitely, for a while when I was learning at my fast food restaurant, I was actually the only woman. So I did a lot of research into sports. And I can't say that I was particularly overwhelmingly remotely interested, but it gave me a starting position where then I developed into knowing that they like video games. And then that was much better. That was a much better topic. So just going around seeing what the most common topic is that your coworkers are talking about and look into that topic. Whether you care or not, honestly, because that can lead to more and more conversation where hopefully you do find something that you have in common with the person.
That's such a great point, is finding that common ground for sure is a good place to start. Pavni or John, anything you want to add before we go to the next question?
Oh yeah, okay, just jump on the bat. Yeah, you said you're in college, right? I think the question, yeah. Also, like this honest, or like, I think at least for me, like, because I'm like 21, almost 22, like, I'll say this, the biggest thing is that, again, common topics go a long way, because honestly, if you really think about it, we all are here like for some common reason, believe it or not. So it's like, even like for me, one thing is like I go to school where 75 to 80% of the people are dudes. And like, I don't understand dudes. Like, I mean, they're all like it's like a very polarizing, like where like I'm from a very blue area, and it's like, I'm from the place like where a lot of people are from like small Midwestern towns, which is such a different thing. And I don't play video games. Like I literally don't like them. And I find that for me, unfortunately, getting a friendship or any kind of relationship or whatever kind of bond you're trying to form with a person will require some kind of compromise. And that's kind of up to you what you want. So for me, it was like a compromise I felt that was personally reasonable for me was maybe understanding more about the topics they like to again do, which was video games. I started researching about video games, and I said, like, I'm interested in playing this. Can you help me learn this? And bam, I got 4 or 5 friends like who I play video games with regularly. Like it's not my, I don't play video games on my own. So like that's the thing. And the other thing is like simply like, I don't know how to say, like don't isolate yourself, but just to put yourself in groups. And even if you keep your mouth shut, like being when in that stage of like where everyone is like in that storming phase, like realized I made this mistake in college, is that when everyone's wanting to make friends, I know it sucks, just go to the events and just try to socialize at the bare minimum, because people are more reciprocative. It's like, imagine it's trying to like, I don't know how to say it, like being like, imagine like in Harry Potter, yeah, like Ron, Hermione, and Harry, right? Like the 3 of them are such tight friends, and then they add like this 4th person. Like it's hard to meld into the group, but it would have been way easier when they were like 11-year-old kids and like all they wanted to do was make friends. So that's literally what I would say. And it's just pushing yourself to the limits. Again, it's do what you're comfortable with. There's no right answer.
Yeah, great point.
I would say to add on to that, I found what was really helpful in college was finding clubs and groups of people with similar interests. So I was really into like travel and like study abroad. So I went on like study abroad, and when I came back, I lived in the international dorm, and it was super cool. I got to meet like so many different people from like other countries, and they were really friendly. And also I was involved in like other clubs that that I was interested in, like I was involved in club sports, for example. On the disclosure part, I would say it's really up to you if you want to disclose, but I find that like I would tend to disclose to like my close friends and people who like, I got to know very well, who all know that I'm on the spectrum. And I also like I would disclose to my coworkers and whatnot. But yeah.
Yeah, that is all some really great input and feedback to share. Hopefully that individual got their question answered. And there was one more question too that was very similar around disclosure. And we'll go ahead and address that one as well. When would you disclose autism during the job process? During resume? Is that something you put on your resume? Something that you bring up in the interview process? When employers oftentimes prompt, if you require an accommodation, let us know. At what point have you, or from your perspective, would you disclose if you want to disclose? Like, at what point have you or would you disclose your diagnosis? Do you want to go first, John?
Yeah, sure. So I would usually disclose in the interview, and there are multiple reasons for that. One of the reasons why is, I think it's just better telling about that when you're with a face-to-face person, like just the human interaction, and like, well, it's a lot different than like, saying it like on your resume or like in a cover letter where it's just on paper. You can really like tell them in person. That's pretty important. And also I would say like, I would another reason why is like, it's good that they know sort of everything about you before you really come onto the position and you join the team. So like that, so that it sort of like, I suppose, tampers their expectations a little bit, but also they know, like, because really, like, when you're joining a team, you're not just joining a team to do a job, you're also getting accustomed to like interpersonal dynamics of teamwork, as well as understanding the culture and workplace politics that goes on with a firm. As I find that a lot of companies have their own sort of unique culture and little way of doing in the interview.
Thank you, John. You bring up a really great point too, is, during the interview process, from, again, I'm going to wear my HR hat here, it's more of a conversation versus it being a one-way disclosure, right? If it's on a resume or something like that, then, it doesn't necessarily open up the door to have a conversation beyond, like you said, here's my situation, but it says, and here's why I want you to know, and here's why this is important to me. And it opens up a door to, Rebecca mentioned this earlier, to, here are the accommodations I need. If I have these accommodations, then it will set me up for success. So it prompts a conversation more focused on all of the benefit by the employer knowing versus it just being a one-way, street where people, it just, could feed into biases. Pavani mentioned that around implicit biases or stereotypes. Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
Like, yeah, I'll say like, kind of, yeah, like also on disclosure, like I'll say this, like, again, do not put it on your resume. Like, I actually just don't. It's like, I think it's just like, again, it's like, unfortunately, whether hiring manager or anyone, like, we all have biases. It's kind of like asking to put away. I don't know how to say it. Like, so don't put it on the resume, like, but again, in person or like virtually, just disclose it. And I also found that, at least for me, like, I probably also should, like, I mean, realizing now from hearing other people's experiences, like, again, I'm probably someone who's really hesitant to disclose it because of like biases, but what I'm realizing is like, ultimately at the end of the day, it's like, if I keep my manager in the dark, it's like, it's gonna backfire and hurt me more than anything. So to save my butt, it's probably better just to disclose it. And honestly, if like, I know like finding jobs is really hard. Like, I feel like people say like, job seekers can be choosy, but that's not as true as it sounds. And the main thing is that, honestly, like I always say, like, if you're being discriminated against, like I'll say, like, I've also had this in person, like there was one company where it was like, you need to do 20 coding problems. I want you in the company for, for like, just not to try to be like professional and not bash others. But there was a company where I was like, they were like, solve 20 of these data structure problems in like 7 minutes or something outrageous. And I was like, hey, I need some accommodations, like, and then I got a rude email saying like, why you didn't disclose it? And I said, I'm very well aware of the biases. So like, I have the documentation. They're like, nope, we disqualify you. So it's like, there are always going to be bad apples. And unfortunately, there are quite a bit of bad apples out there. So just don't take it personally. It's more so like, again, society has a long way to go. And the employers that are actually accommodating, it's a green flag. And honestly, like that employer, like had I been hired, it's probably been a red flag and I've been miserable. So yeah, again, try not to take it personally. It's just like, every company's, it's a convoluted process and it sucks, but
Mhm.
like I said, to change the system, you have to be in the system.
Yeah. Yeah, all really great feedback. Anyone else want to weigh in?
So I am an odd story because it is all over my LinkedIn. It is all over my resume because I'm on multiple advocacy panels. I'm on the Linkit Steering Committee. I'm on the Autism Society of North Carolina's Self Advocate. I'm the chairman of that board, Self Advocates Board. I am on a committee for Teach as well. So all of those things are on my resume. So therefore it says I'm autistic. So, but there's two things that I do to help mitigate that. One, I have a very established network. And I leverage that because it's true. And as Bill and other people have said in the chat, that people don't need to tell you why your application was rejected. You just get an automated response most of the time saying, we've chosen to move on with somebody else. You'll never know what happened. So, thanks, Wes. That is one of the biggest things that I do to help mitigate it is I have very quantifiable achievements, and I'm being quantifiable in terms of money saved and time saved. So it is I put that at the top of my resume of this is what I've done and this is the effect that it had. And that's one of the biggest things that I would like to put forth to job seekers is that you don't just want to list responsibilities on your LinkedIn and on your resume. You want to list effects that you had, benefits. And that's going to catch people's attention more than anything. And networking just it really does help. So that's important as well. So I don't necessarily like I was when I was looking for a job, I did blindly apply to jobs, but mostly I also emailed the recruiters. In certain cases, I managed to track down their business email creatively and emailed them directly, introducing myself. And that impressed a lot of people because finding the recruiter and emailing them directly shows dedication at least. So I would say that I agree that disclosing on a resume can be harmful in some ways, but in that I am a different situation because I am established. But I would take the takeaway I would also put whether you choose to disclose on your resume or not is you always want to put benefits on your resume that you've had.
Yeah, it's such a great point, Rebecca. I think to paraphrase what everyone has said, I think the question is why, right? Why are you putting it on your resume? What is the value add in that? In Rebecca's case, she's got some really great leadership, right? She's demonstrating leadership, through some of the work she's doing, in the autism space. So all such great nuggets of information that was shared today. And I know I only have 8 or 9 minutes left. So let's just do a quick 1 to 2 minute max response for the very last question, which is, many of the folks here today are here because they're in the job searching process, whether it's to land a job or to explore other opportunities than their current job. So what advice do you have? What do you want to leave folks with here today? John, we'll start with you. Any parting words?
Yeah, I would say don't give up. I mean, we've been there, all of us been here. It takes time. It's a struggle. And that's the unfortunate part of the process and reality. But also, I have, be aggressive, connect with people on LinkedIn, on the recruiters. Go ahead and take the initiative and email them first, as well as, attach a cover letter to just, really, to really make yourself stand out. I mean, because that's what it takes, I'd say.
Excellent. Thank you, John. Becca.
So one of the biggest mistakes that I made in college when I was looking for a job out of college is going up to recruiters and interviews and saying, so what does this company do? I did not know any better back then, but you should be looking up facts about the company before you interview and be prepared to tell them why you want to work there. And one thing that is very important to me is that my values need to align with the companies that I am working with. That is extremely important to me. So definitely look up facts about the company, be able to say why you want to work there. Like John said, do what you can to track down the recruiter, leverage network. And then remember, as I said in the beginning, that writing is a very undervalued and underutilized skill. A well-written email will do a lot. And if you are reaching out to recruiters on LinkedIn or anybody on LinkedIn, you should be saying why you are reaching out to them. If you just blindly, I will receive messages that say, hi, how are you? I don't accept those. Because I don't know what they want, and I am perfectly willing to help people, but but it depends. I need to know their purpose, especially as a woman on a social media platform, and especially as a Jewish woman on a social media platform, some stuff that can come up can be quite toxic. So that is another thing, is always compliment reaching out to somebody with a personalized message.
Yeah, great point, for sure. Great point. And Pavani, close us out.
I think, yeah, one of the main things is I feel like maybe how to say it, I mean, I think definitely society needs to go a long way. And the other thing is that don't take it personally when people are rude or anything. I feel like this also deals with a lot of issues, even with racism. I'm trying not to get sticky, controversial topics, but the main thing is that, there's nothing wrong with you, or even, and I have to say, even for parents or whatever, out there, there's nothing wrong with your child just because they have autism. It is not a death sentence. It just means they have so many different things. It's how to say it, it's when we say someone with Down syndrome has special needs or is a wonderful person, it's just so many different ways, it's I don't know how to say it, the stigma definitely needs to stop. And the other thing is just because it's a way of just saying our brains are all wired differently, and all our brains aren't. Some people have anxiety, some people have ADHD, some people, have disorders or whatever stuff, that just don't happen genetically. I mean, genetics can play a role, but they just will pop up. So it's I think that's the main thing. And the other thing is, there are a lot of resources out there, and the main thing is that, you're not alone. So just reach out to other people. And the thing is, there's a lot of people who are going to say no, but it takes a lot of no's to get one yes. It's what I've learned the hard way. And also just be open-minded, even on our side, yeah.
Such great advice. Well, thank you once again to our fabulous panelists, John, Becca, and Pavani. We're going to do a silent applause. Everyone, throw your hands up for our awesome panelists. And I think so as you are aware, shortly here, we will go into our next part of the agenda, and then we'll be here again tomorrow for day 2 of the Autism Summit. So before we close out, I believe we have a video we wanted to show. So Christina, if you are there, you can take over the screen and show the video.
All right, I will put that up right now. This is a video from our sponsor, Linkit, which is Link NC or LINCIT. And I will have it up and playing for you guys shortly.
I just want to throw in there that that was the program that I joined my company through.
Hi, my name is Morgan Crawford, and I'm with the North Carolina Business Committee for Education, the education nonprofit in the governor's office. Linkit is North Carolina's statewide internship program for early career autistic professionals and students. Linkit leverages vocational rehabilitation funding to provide job coaching for Linkit interns and their managers. This high quality support is provided by the Autism Society of North Carolina and UNC Teach Autism Center. For more information, go to our website, linkit.org. Now we'd like to share a video with you highlighting the program of one of our employer partners, Credit Suisse.
At Credit Suisse, we believe inclusive diversity drives success. We're working to integrate skilled individuals into the workforce who see the world a little differently, and in doing so, we're embracing a significant talent opportunity.
Participating in the neurodiverse program here at Credit Suisse is the thing that I'm most proud of professionally. Here in Raleigh, we interviewed, selected, and mentored the first candidate, and that resulted in the first direct hire through the neurodiversity program.
For a personal standpoint, it's allowed me to be open about who I am, and that's, to me, is the most important part. It's like I can be in this place where I'm allowed to be what I am, and that's pretty good.
Previously, I was in a low-skill job with challenging hours. Having a normal work week as I do now allows me to have friends and hobbies, which drastically decrease my stress level. I lived with my parents before this position, and having a low-skill job and not being able to move out at 25. This position has given me more confidence in myself as I now live on my own and am supporting myself.
Credit Suisse has already seen real business value from the diversity of thought, the different skills and abilities these candidates bring. We think the North Carolina area and the Triangle could be the perfect place for attracting, fostering and supporting this talent pipeline, and really could be the go-to location for neurodiverse individuals and their families.
If you're interested in an internship through Linkit or want to find out more information, please visit the website to submit an application. If you're an employer who would like the opportunity to find talented new team members, you can contact us through the website, linkit.org, LINC-IT.org. Thank you.
All right, that concludes this session. Bye-bye.